Snow fell in slow, soundless sheets, covering the world like a shroud. The sky was a low bruise, heavy with grief, pressing down upon the blackened remains of a cabin that had once smelled of bread and pine smoke. Now it was only ash and silence. Evelyn Hale knelt in the ruin, her skirts stiff with frost, her bare hands bleeding as she brushed soot from a half-buried locket. Inside it, two faces smiled faintly beneath cracked glass, her husband and their little boy. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, only the strange calm that came when pain had gone too far to scream. Around her, the wind moved like a ghost through the burnt beams, whistling a tune that once might have been laughter. Her breath rose in small clouds, then vanished. "I tried," she whispered into the emptiness, her voice trembling like an old prayer. "I tried to keep them safe." Her words were swallowed by snow. In the distance, wolves sang. The sound made her lift her head, though she no longer feared anything living. Death, she thought, would come kindly tonight, perhaps as sleep, perhaps as the weight of snow. She almost welcomed it. Then she saw him. A figure emerging from the timberline, immense and slow-moving, his breath a plume of mist in the freezing air. He came bare-chested despite the cold, a fur pelt draped over his shoulders, his white hair spilling like smoke down his back. The tomahawk at his side gleamed dark red at the edge. For a heartbeat, Evelyn thought she was seeing a spirit, some ancient mountain god come to finish what fate had started. But as he drew closer, she saw the deep lines of a man's face, the long scar running from temple to jaw, and the quiet sorrow in his dark eyes. The wind carried the faint smell of blood. Evelyn rose, swaying. "Did you?" Her voice cracked. "Did you do this?" The man said nothing. He dropped something heavy into the snow, a leather pouch, tied with sinew. It rolled open. Inside were 3 scalps, bound together with the copper buttons she'd sewn on her husband's coat. She staggered back, one hand to her mouth. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The faces of the raiders flashed before her. The men who had laughed as they burned her home, who dragged her out by her hair while her child screamed. She had thought they'd gone unpunished, carried off by the storm like demons. But this man, this white-haired Apache, had hunted them through the blizzard. He stood over the offering without pride or malice, as if vengeance were only a duty done. Evelyn sank to her knees again. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" He looked at her a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, gravel shaped by wind. "They kill woman. Child." A pause. Not right. The simplicity of it undid her. She pressed the locket to her chest and bowed her head. Tears fell soundlessly, freezing before they reached the ground. The warrior watched her without moving. His breath rose and fell slowly, the only rhythm in the white stillness. Then he stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. He pulled a fur from his shoulder and draped it over her shivering body. The gesture was careful, reverent, as if he feared she might break beneath his touch. "I don't want to live," she murmured. He tilted his head, unreadable. "Then your child died twice." She looked up sharply. His words struck like an arrow. Her lips parted to speak, but nothing came. In the reflection of his eyes she saw herself, hollow, small, a flicker against the vastness of snow, and something deep inside her shifted, a spark under ice. He turned toward the trees and gestured once. She hesitated, hugging the fur tighter around her shoulders. The air between them felt fragile, holy somehow. Then she followed. They walked through the snow until the burned homestead was swallowed by distance. The storm thickened, flakes swirling like ash. Her feet dragged. She stumbled more than once, but each time she fell, he lifted her wordlessly. Once she tried to thank him, but he shook his head as if the sound itself would waste strength better used on breath. By dusk, her vision blurred. The world narrowed to the rhythm of his steps, the creak of snow, the scent of pine smoke carried faintly on the wind ahead. Her mind drifted between exhaustion and memory. Her son's laughter, the warmth of bread, the way her husband used to hum while mending fences. All gone now, yet something in the old warrior's silence reminded her of that steadiness, a presence that did not demand, only endured. When the first cabin lights appeared between the trees, she nearly wept again. Smoke curled upward, pale against the darkening sky. He pushed open the door with a low groan of wood. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and sage. Animal skins hung drying near the fire. A carved wooden bowl of water steamed on a flat stone, a simple act of hospitality prepared before her arrival. She sank onto a fur by the hearth. He knelt nearby, stirring coals until the flames rose higher. For the first time she saw his hands, broad, scarred, trembling slightly as he handled the iron pot. Not from weakness, she realized, but from memory. He ladled broth into a wooden cup and offered it to her. She hesitated, then took it. The taste was sharp, venison, herbs, and smoke. It burned her throat, pulling warmth back into her. She met his eyes across the firelight, wanting to ask his name, but something in his stillness told her not to. Names, she sensed, were sacred things among his people, not given lightly. Outside, the wind screamed through the pines. The fire popped, sending sparks toward the rafters. He sat across from her, cross-legged, eyes half closed. In the shifting light, his scars looked like rivers drawn across his chest, maps of survival. She found herself wondering how many winters he had endured, how many losses. When she spoke, it was barely a whisper. "They took everything I had." He opened his eyes. "Then take what left," he said quietly. "Breath. Warmth. Morning." The words were broken but heavy with truth. She nodded, unable to speak again. The silence between them deepened. Not empty, but full of something unsaid, something waiting to be born. Later, as sleep crept in, she watched him through half-lidded eyes. He moved to the doorway, scanning the forest, then returned to sit beside the fire. His presence filled the room like a mountain fills the horizon, immovable, eternal. When she finally closed her eyes, she dreamed of her child's laughter mingling with the wind. For the first time since the fire, her heart did not hurt as sharply. Sometime in the night, the storm eased. The cabin creaked softly as snow settled on the roof. Evelyn stirred awake to faint chanting. A low, rhythmic sound from where he sat by the fire, eyes closed, palms raised. She didn't understand the words, but she felt them. A prayer to guide the dead, perhaps, or to cleanse the living. Tears welled again. Not from sorrow this time, but from the quiet realization that someone, this stranger, this ancient warrior, had carried vengeance for her when she had nothing left to carry. She whispered into the darkness, not sure if he could hear. "Thank you." The chanting paused. The old Apache turned his head slightly, his profile etched in firelight. He said nothing, only inclined his head once, a gesture that felt like blessing. Morning would come soon, cold and bright, and she did not know where her life would go from here. But as the flames flickered across his white hair, she understood one thing with a clarity that startled her. She was no longer alone. Outside, the wind rose again, scattering ash and snow across the frozen earth. And somewhere beyond the trees, the ghosts of the raiders vanished into silence. Morning came pale and slow, the kind of light that touched nothing warmly. Smoke curled from the small hearth, and the smell of cedar clung to the air. Evelyn woke beneath a thick pelt, her limbs sore but alive. For a long while she only listened. To the pop of wood, the sigh of wind through the chinks in the cabin walls, the low murmur of a man's breath as he worked. She turned her head. The Apache sat by the fire, grinding herbs in a bowl. Steam rose from the pot beside him, clouding his face like mist. His movements were patient, deliberate, each one echoing an old rhythm, as though time itself had slowed for him. He looked up briefly when she stirred. Their eyes met. He nodded once. No words. She watched him for a moment longer, unsure whether to speak. The silence between them wasn't cruel. It felt sacred, as if anything said too soon would break something fragile. She pulled the fur tighter around her shoulders. Her clothes, washed and folded, rested by the door. She hadn't even noticed him cleaning them. When he rose, the floor creaked under his weight. He handed her a wooden cup of broth. It steamed against her fingers, smelling of venison and sage. She whispered, "Thank you," though she wasn't sure he understood. He only inclined his head slightly and turned back to the fire. Outside, snow whispered against the roof. The storm hadn't ended, only softened. Evelyn's gaze wandered around the cabin. The rough-hewn walls, the bundle of dried herbs, the the carved animal bones hanging above the doorway. Everything had a purpose, nothing for show. The bed she'd slept in was made of pine boughs, the air heavy with resin and smoke. A sense of being sheltered, not owned, filled her chest. He spoke suddenly, his accent thick, words chosen carefully. Name? She hesitated. Evelyn. He repeated it quietly, shaping the syllables like a prayer. Evelyn. Her eyes softened. And yours? He poked the fire before answering. Tenzin. White Wolf. She nodded. Tenzin. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, a brief pride that she said it right. He returned to his work, setting a small clay bowl near her. Inside was a paste, sharp-smelling and green. For hurt, he said, motioning toward her hand. She glanced down. The skin was raw from digging through ash the day before. When she hesitated, he reached for her hand gently, his touch surprisingly careful for someone with such rough palms. He spread the salve across the wound, his thumb tracing over her knuckles with slow precision. The sensation was both tender and unbearable. She looked away, her breath catching. Your people, she murmured, voice trembling. They don't mind you helping a settler? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was with quiet gravity. Many dead. My people yours. Snow no care what skin it cover. The words lingered between them. She wanted to ask more, to understand him, this man who had walked out of legend and loss, but something in his posture warned her not to pry. He lived inside silence like others lived inside prayer. Days passed that way. Snow deepened. The world outside became a soft cage of white. Within the cabin, they fell into a rhythm. He chopped wood, mended traps, cooked in silence. She cleaned, folded, learned his word for water, for fire, for thank you. In turn, he began to echo hers, shyly, like a child testing new music. At night, when the storm howled like a grieving woman, he fed the flames higher, and the shadows danced across his shoulders, tracing the stories written in his scars. Once, as she patched one of his old shirts, she caught him watching her. The look wasn't hunger, nor pity, something quieter, older. As if he were remembering another woman long buried under other winters. She lowered her gaze and kept stitching. The silence then was almost unbearable in its intimacy. When the storm finally cleared, she stepped outside for the first time. The cold cut her breath short. The forest glittered under the low sun, the snow deep enough to swallow her boots. Behind her, smoke curled from the chimney in a thin gray thread. She felt suddenly small, as if the world had been erased and rewritten in white. Tenzin emerged soon after, carrying a small bundle of sticks and herbs. He placed them before a row of stones half buried in snow, 3 of them, carefully marked. Her heart clenched. They were graves. Her husband. Her child. He had carried their remains here, given them a resting place. She knelt beside him, tears freezing against her lashes. You did this. He nodded once, eyes lowered. They rest now. She covered her mouth with both hands, overwhelmed. Words deserted her. Gratitude felt too small. She reached out and touched his arm, a simple, trembling gesture. His muscles stiffened under her palm, then slowly relaxed. For the first time, he didn't step away. They stood there for a long time in the hush of snow, 2 broken lives caught in the same breath of winter. That evening, something changed. The silence between them no longer felt like a wall. As she helped him prepare supper, she began to speak. Not all at once, but in fragments. About her boy, her husband, the scent of cornmeal in the morning, the lullaby she used to hum. He listened without interruption, eyes fixed on the fire. When she faltered, he poured her more broth, as though to say continue. At one point, her voice cracked. I thought God had forgotten me. Tenzin's gaze lifted, deep and steady. Maybe God sends storm, he said softly. Storm bring you here. The words sank into her like warmth. For the first time in months, she laughed, though it came out broken. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Enough that she saw the man beneath the warrior, the tired kindness hidden there. Night fell heavy and blue. She lay awake on her side of the cabin, listening to his slow breathing across the fire. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, 1,000 years old. The flames painted shifting light across his face, silvering his hair. He looked almost otherworldly, like something carved from the mountain itself. She whispered into the dark, not sure he could hear. "You could have left me there." A pause. Then through the quiet his voice came, rough and honest. "No man leave life in snow." Her throat tightened. She turned toward him, but his eyes were already closed, as if the words had cost him sleep. She lay there watching the fire fade to embers, her heart pulsing with a strange, dangerous warmth. By dawn, she rose to find him outside, kneeling in the snow beside the graves. He was murmuring in his own tongue, a soft chant carried by wind. She didn't understand, but she felt it, the sorrow, the reverence. She stepped quietly behind him, the hem of her skirt brushing snow. For a moment, she almost reached out, almost laid a hand on his shoulder. But she stopped herself. Some silences, she realized, were prayers not to be broken. The light over the pines turned gold, cold and pure. She looked down at the graves and then at the man kneeling before them, and for the first time since the fire that destroyed her life, she felt a reason, small but alive, to keep breathing. Behind them, the cabin smoked gently in the morning chill, its warmth waiting, its fire still burning. And though she didn't yet know it, that fire would soon burn for them both. The thaw came slowly that year, creeping through the trees like forgiveness too long withheld. Snow turned to slush, streams began to sing again, and the pine-scented air filled with the smell of wet earth and smoke. Evelyn watched it all from the cabin window, how the world softened and cracked open again. Yet in her heart, the storm hadn't passed. It waited in the distance, the way thunder waits behind hills. Tenzin was outside, sharpening his knife on a stone. The sound, steady, rhythmic, blended with birdsong. She found comfort in it, the way one finds comfort in knowing the sun will rise even after nights of grief. But she also felt something else, something she couldn't yet name, the uneasy pull between safety and belonging. That morning he told her. "Town near. Need salt. Flour." Evelyn turned from the hearth. "You're going to town?" He shook his head. "We go." Her pulse quickened. They'll stare." He looked up from the blade, eyes calm, unreadable. "They always stare." So they went. The trail wound through pines heavy with meltwater, past streams where the ice cracked like breaking glass. Evelyn walked beside him, her boots sinking deep in mud. She'd tied her hair with a strip of linen. He carried his bow slung across his shoulder, his white hair bound in a braid that shimmered against the morning light. To her, he looked like something carved from the earth itself, ageless, enduring. Yet she knew what others would see. A savage, a danger. By the time they reached the town, the sun hung low. The place was little more than a handful of wooden buildings. A general store, a saloon, a smithy, a church that looked forever half-finished. When they stepped onto the main street, everything stopped. Men leaned from porches. Women froze mid-step, clutching baskets. Even the wind seemed to hush. Evelyn's stomach twisted as she felt the weight of their stares. Tenzin walked on, unbothered. His bare chest gleamed faintly beneath his fur cloak. He moved as if the earth itself had granted him passage. She followed close behind, head bowed, heart hammering. Inside the store, the silence broke into whispers. That her? Widow Hale. Living with that heathen now. Old Miriam, the storekeeper, met her gaze from behind the counter. Her wrinkled face softened, but she said nothing. Evelyn gathered her supplies, flour, salt, matches. Her hands shook as she placed the coins on the counter. The door banged open. Deputy Ross Kramer filled the threshold, his hat low, his badge gleaming. He was a tall man with a face carved by scorn. "Well, I'll be," he drawled, stepping forward. "Didn't think I'd see the Widow Hale keeping company with redskins. Guess the snows made folks forget their place." The room froze. Tenzin turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing. Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. "He saved my life." Kramer sneered. "And what's he saving now, huh? Woman, like you don't live with a man like that unless—" The sound of Tenzin's hand hitting the counter cracked through the room like thunder. The deputy's words died midair. The old warrior didn't speak, but his gaze said everything, ancient fury barely contained. Kramer's hand twitched toward his holster. "Careful, old man." Evelyn stepped between them, her palms raised. "Please," she said, trembling. "We came for salt, not blood." The deputy spat near her feet. "Maybe you forgot who you are, Mrs. Hale. But the rest of us haven't. Don't bring shame to decent folk." He pushed past her and left. The door slammed shut, leaving the air thick with humiliation. Miriam's voice broke the silence. "Pay him no mind, child." Her eyes softened. "Men like him talk loud to hide their emptiness." Evelyn nodded, but her cheeks burned. She turned to find Tenzin still standing there, unmoving. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark with something that looked like shame, not for himself but for her. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that the cruelty belonged to others, but the words wouldn't come. On the walk back, the forest felt heavier. She carried the sack of flour against her chest, her breath rising in visible puffs. The quiet between them stretched. Finally, she said softly, "They don't know you." He didn't look at her. "They know what they want to know." His tone wasn't bitter, just tired. She wanted to touch his arm, to bridge that small, aching distance, but something inside her hesitated. Instead, she said, "What you did for me, no one's ever done that." He stopped walking. Snow dripped from branches overhead, each drop glinting in the weak light. "No one should die alone," he said. "Not woman. Not child. Not enemy." She stared at him. "And you? You live alone." He smiled faintly, almost sadly. "Until snow bring you." Something inside her trembled. They stood there in the forest, the sound of thawing water all around them, the air close and still. She wanted to step closer, to thank him properly, but her courage failed. Instead, she whispered, "You gave me back life." He shook his head. "You already had it. Just forgot to hold on." The words sank deep into her chest, warming something that had long been cold. When they returned to the cabin, the sky had darkened. She lit the fire while he set down the supplies. The warmth spilled across the floor, gilding the furs and wooden walls in gold. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying faint echoes of laughter from some faraway camp. Human, indifferent. She sat near the fire, sewing a tear in her dress. Tenzin sat opposite, carving a small wooden figure. The light flickered between them, catching in his hair. For a long while, neither spoke. It was a peaceful silence, until she asked, softly, "Do you regret it? Killing them?" He didn't look up. "Regret feeds ghosts. I already have enough." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him he wasn't one of them, that he still carried goodness like a hidden flame, but she feared saying it aloud would ruin the fragile understanding they'd built. Instead, she watched him finish the carving. He handed it to her, a tiny figure of a bird, wings outstretched. "Freedom," he said. She smiled, though her eyes glistened. "It's beautiful." He nodded once and turned back to the fire. Outside, the forest rustled. A coyote called. Somewhere beyond the ridge, faint hoofbeats echoed, distant yet distinct. Tenzin's head lifted. His body went still, every muscle alert. "What is it?" she whispered. He stood, moving toward the door, hand on his bow. The sound came again, deliberate, approaching. "Riders," he said quietly. "Not friend." The firelight caught the edge of his scar as he glanced back at her. For the first time since she'd known him, there was no calm in his eyes, only warning. Evelyn rose slowly, the bird carving still warm in her hand. The sound of hooves grew louder through the trees, breaking the fragile peace of the thaw. She met his gaze, her heart pounding, and whispered, "They're coming for you." He nodded once, his voice low and steady. "Then they find both of us." The night split open with the sound of hooves. Firelight quivered across the cabin walls, painting Tenzin's face in gold and shadow. Evelyn's breath caught as he reached for his bow, his movements calm yet brimming with the quiet readiness of a man who had known too many storms. Outside, men's voices echoed through the pines, harsh, eager, full of the cruelty that fed on righteousness. "White wolf!" a voice bellowed. You're harboring stolen goods and a stolen woman. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice, Deputy Kramer. The sound of it made her throat burn with old humiliation. Tenzin's eyes met hers. Go behind, he said softly. She shook her head. No. For a moment, neither moved. The world outside crackled, boots crunching snow, rifles being readied. Then Tenzin opened the door, stepping into the cold night as if it were an old friend. Moonlight washed the clearing in silver. 5 men stood in the snow, their breath ghosting into the air. At their head, Kramer's badge gleamed. Step aside, old man, he called. The law says you don't belong here. Tenzin said nothing. He stood tall, broad shoulders bare beneath his fur cloak, white hair glinting. Behind him, the cabin's glow spilled out like a small promise of warmth in a world of frost. Kramer spat into the snow. You think killing a few bandits makes you a hero? You're still an animal. And she, he sneered, jerking his chin toward the door. She's a fool for sharing your den. Evelyn stepped out before Tenzin could stop her. The cold bit through her dress, but she didn't flinch. Her voice was clear, steadier than she felt. He's my husband. The words fell like stones in the stillness. Kramer's laughter cracked through the night. Your husband? God help you, woman. That's not a man, that's a beast playing at one. Tenzin's hand tightened around his bow, the wood creaking faintly. Evelyn touched his arm. Don't, she whispered. He's not worth your soul. But Kramer lifted his rifle. Then maybe I'll save you from your mistake. The shot rang out. It missed Tenzin by inches, splintering a log behind him. The sound tore through the night, and before anyone could breathe, Tenzin moved, not with rage but precision. The arrow left his bow in a hiss, striking the rifle clean from Kramer's hands. The others stumbled back, fear flaring across their faces. Enough! Evelyn cried, stepping between them. There's been enough death. The men hesitated, glancing at one another. Tenzin's stillness unnerved them, his silence, more dangerous than any roar. Kramer clutched his bleeding hand, fury twisting his mouth. You'll pay for this, he growled. Both of you. He turned and stumbled toward his horse, the others following, their bravado melting into the dark. The sound of hooves retreated into the forest, until only the whisper of snow remained. Evelyn's knees gave out. She fell into the snow, trembling. Tenzin knelt beside her, his palm on her shoulder. You hurt. She shook her head, tears breaking free. I thought I'd lose you. He looked at her for a long moment, his breath misting in the air between them. No storm take me yet. Something inside her broke open. She reached up, cupping his face in both hands. His skin was cold, the roughness of his scars beneath her palms grounding her in the moment's impossible tenderness. You've given me more than life, she whispered. You gave me peace. He hesitated, searching her eyes as though afraid to believe. You bring me home, he said simply. The words undid her. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. For a heartbeat, all the world fell away, the trees, the snow, the silence. There was only the steady sound of their breathing, 2 rhythms finding one another at last. By morning, the sky turned pale gold. The storm had broken for good, leaving the forest glittering and still. They walked together toward the ridge behind the cabin, where the pines rose tall and solemn. Smoke from the hearth curled gently into the air. At the clearing she saw it, a small fire built in a circle of stones, the flames flickering soft and low. He had prepared it before dawn. Evelyn looked at him questioningly. Tenzin placed his bow on the ground, then reached into the leather pouch at his side and drew out 2 eagle feathers. He tied them together with a strip of deer hide and held them between them. In my way, he said slowly. Fire see truth. Sky hear promise. You stay, I stay. Her throat tightened. She understood without needing more words. She nodded. He tied one feather to her wrist, the other to his own. Then, together, they knelt before the small fire. The light wavered across their faces, gold against the morning snow. She could feel the warmth licking her hands, could hear the faint rustle of pines overhead. witnesses to a vow no church would ever bless, yet more sacred than any she'd known. He murmured something in his tongue, low and rhythmic, like a prayer woven with wind. When he finished, he looked into her eyes, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now you are my home." Evelyn smiled through her tears. "And you are mine." They pressed their foreheads together once more, the feathers brushing softly between them. For a moment, time stilled. The forest, the fire, the breath between them. Then a sound broke it, distant hoofbeats again, faint and fading. She tensed, but Tenzin only exhaled. "They ride away," he said. "Shame heavier than snow." She looked at him, at the faint smile touching his lips, and realized he was right. No law could undo what the fire had witnessed. No judgment could reach the heart that had already chosen. They stayed by the fire as the morning deepened, letting the warmth soak through the chill. Her hand found his, fingers interlocking. Around them, the forest glowed with thawing light. When the sun climbed higher, she rose, looking toward the horizon. The graves beneath the pines were covered now, not with sorrow, but with peace. She took a breath, slow and full, and whispered, "I think they can rest now." Tenzin nodded. "So can you." He stood beside her, tall and silent, his presence vast as the land itself. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. From below the ridge, the faint laughter of children echoed. Settlers gathering in the distance, life returning to the valley. The sound didn't sting anymore. It felt like music. Evelyn turned to him. "Will you ever tire of this world?" He smiled faintly. "World, tire of me first." She laughed softly, the sound small and bright against the stillness. As the sun spilled over the trees, Tenzin wrapped his fur cloak around her shoulders. Together, they stood watching the smoke rise from their cabin, a thin gray thread curling into the cold sky, like a prayer answered. And though no preacher spoke, no bells rang, the world itself seemed to bow in quiet witness as the widow and the warrior bound their lives beneath the pines, where love had grown not from passion, but from mercy, from fire, from silence. Far above, a hawk circled once and vanished into the light. And somewhere deep in the forest, the wind carried the faint echo of his voice, a whisper, a vow, that no snow, no judgment, and no passing age could ever erase.